Welcome back to the long-awaited final video in this FJ62 Land Cruiser front axle rebuild and re-gear with the installation of the ARB locker up front to complement the locker that's already been installed and 488 gears in the rear. It has been some time, it's going on a couple months now. I had to wait for some parts to come in from ARB. Hopefully their back order is starting to be resolved. What I'm going to do today is just give you the walkthrough of all the parts laid out here, pretty much the reassembly now that everything's practically been cleaned up and up to speed, if you will, where we're at, what we've gotten done, and hopefully by the end of this video, all of this shit is back together and this truck is rolling down the road. Okay, so starting at this end, the ARB air locker kit, RD142. We do have that ahead of us, still plumbing in the airline, adding the additional switch, and putting on the valve onto the compressor, which is already installed. We do have a set of new OEM Toyota brake rotors. These have been redesigned apparently, so they no longer use the stud. That's good because I didn't buy new studs and those would have to be cleaned up. Some new pads. Okay, the brake shields have been cleaned up and repainted. These are the knuckles themselves, also repainted. The hubs, obviously we'll get the little bit of surface flash rust out of there before we put the bearings in. New tie rod ends, including new tie rod ends installed, 555, including cleaning up the shafts. You can call them steering arms. The spindles, steering arms, bottom caps, the hubs themselves, good quality vintage Asian hubs. I wish that the paint hadn't gotten so bad on those, but pretty darn good shape. New wheel bearings, trunnion bearings for the, obviously those go on those, top and bottom of the knuckle. Moving right along over to here, still got all of this hardware has been cleaned up. These are the cone washers that go into the top of the knuckle, along with those steering arms. Got our burr fields cleaned up here pretty well. No signs of any significant wear. Probably going to take a tiny bit of emery cloth to these seal surfaces right quick, but they do appear to be in good shape with no real grooves. The splines inspected really well, in good shape there. Practically all of the knuckle wiper assembly, seals, and so forth, which came in the Sumo Gear Premium Rebuild Kit from Cruiser Outfitters. The Wits End posters here, got one for the 80 series as well as the 60 series, 66 too, so that's going to be a little bit helpful and looks pretty damn cool. And fortunately our brothers over at Cruiser Outfitters always include the instructions, which tells you your torques, your assembly, as well as your spring scale, tension. So we're gonna have to set the tension on these bearings. The preload is what I'm trying to say, and get this thing put back together. So what we did do before we wrapped things up was on the last push was we installed the new bearings up here, bearing race top, bearing race in the bottom, and a new seal. Get that wiped out, but the differential has been installed and the drive shaft is reattached. Gotten quite a bit of cleanup done on the axle there. We'll finish cleaning that up and get some paint on it, but that's pretty much where we're at. Just got to reassemble these things. And I guess there's one other thing we've got to do. I did buy all new brake lines to kind of rebend into shape. New steel brake lines and rubber brake lines for the rest of this, for this whole assembly. So that will be kind of the final touches before we can roll it out of here. We'll get the brakes bled and the system working. Probably try to push all the old fluid out of the rear brakes at the same time. This video will probably span 2 or 3 days worth of work, and I'll try to keep it as detailed as I can, but also trying to be as efficient as I can. So if you have any questions about the specifics of the installation or any of these things, there's tons of videos out there and threads on I Hate Mud and the Yoda Tech forums and everything else. So leave a question if you have one for me. I'll be happy to answer it, but this isn't going to be an absolute detailed how-to. It's just kind of an overview of what you can expect if you take on this challenge yourself. On that note, what I will mention is that any job like this, from my experience, is you know, the removal and the installation of the parts isn't the biggest challenge. I mean, it's the cleanup, honestly. The cleanup, the scrubbing it down, scraping off the grease, sanding it, prepping the metal, repainting everything is what takes so much time. One of the threads I was reading through the other day talked about, I don't know how old this thread was, probably maybe 10 years old thread or something, but the guy was mentioning how like $600 to rebuild this axle in labor. And I'm thinking, well, if I was gonna do it for $600, there would be practically no cleanup or repaint or anything, because that compounds the effort substantially. So I'm not sure how many hours I will have into this thing, but if I had to estimate, somewhere close to 20 man hours, maybe more. So there's no way I could do that for a customer. It would cost a fair bit, because it takes quite a bit of time, but that's because I want to do it thoroughly. So if you're getting into this project, maybe budget yourself a good 20 to 30 hours to do it well. And anyway, good luck. Hopefully by the end of this video, all this stuff is wrapped up and we're rolling down the road. Stay tuned. So here we are, even more hardware cleanup. Practically the order in which we are going to install this, as depicted here, is these go behind the knuckle. Okay, so those parts are going to be installed before we even begin to slide the knuckle over the axle housing. Okay, and then of course the bearings go on the top and the bottom trunnion, top steering arm. Then that slides on after all that's buttoned up. Then in goes the axle shaft, followed by the spindle assembly. So we've got some moly grease we're gonna pack these little bearings up with real well, and then we're gonna fully load up the entire cavity of this knuckle, including packing it into all of the crevices of the burr field joint itself. Let these parts soak in the sun for a little bit, warm them up, soften them up. Just a little bit of general purpose grease kind of on the axle knuckle there, and it's just a matter of trying to squeeze it on and over without tearing it. And you just got to kind of ease it over, but I think a little bit of lube all around here seems to help. There we go, got it on without tearing it. Nice. And it probably would be easier to do those without the bearing races in, but it doesn't make that much of a difference. And this one here is your split ring. Put some of that shit in your palm. Work it in. Free from lint, sand, dirt, anything like that. In she goes. Just the top one there. Okay, so this is kind of the, trying to film with a greasy hand. This is kind of the most critical part of this whole operation, is just setting the preload, the tension on the upper trunnion bearing and the lower trunnion bearing using these shims here. So this is the setup that came out of the truck. Essentially, there was a thick one on the top, a thick one on the bottom, and then a pretty damn thin shim on the top. So the new parts come with two individually wrapped kits. This was its own, these were all their own. And what we have is basically one semi-thick one, maybe the next size thick one, and it kind of explains what the shim's thicknesses are, but I'm not going to bust out a caliper or a micrometer to determine that. So what I'm going to use is the old ones as a guideline. These should be, the new upgrades should be stainless steel, I believe, which is an improvement over carbon steel for corrosion resistance, at least. So I'm going to be following the procedure basically of trying to get the preload dialed, which will practically entail pulling it off and putting it back on a couple of times before with the adjustments necessary, after torquing them down. And so for a more detailed part of that, you should just look at the factory service manual. I'll put a link down in the description, and follow the steps. But to keep it simple here, that's essentially what we got to do, is just kind of evenly space out from the bottom to the top, and then put in the correct amount of shims to adjust the preload as necessary. All right, here we go. Lower cap. It's going to slide on the bottom there once we get the bearing in, and then we'll put the top cap on. Want to make sure there is no hair, lint, sand, anything in between any of these surfaces, obviously. So I'll wipe down clean and clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two thick ones, which are roughly the equivalent of the original thick one that came out of it. See if we can use one nut to kind of contain that. Okay. Same on the top. Two thicker ones, which essentially equate to the size of the original. And we're just going to go with that. We've still got 3 different really thin shims to work for the adjustment, but this should essentially theoretically center the knuckle so that the axle shaft itself is, of course, centered. Okay, on with this. One thing I forgot to do was, where I had painted these, I got to clean the paint out real quick on those. Yep, you guessed it, my brain trick fucked me. So I looked at this damn thing, figured, okay, this is where the brakes go. And the knuckle is tilted. This must be the right one. And I put the other one back. Got this one all fucking cleaned up. And it's the wrong damn one, obviously. The freaking hub and your wheels can't mount this fucking direction. What are you gonna do? We're gonna change it back around, all right. Ta-da! That looks a little more correct, right? Good grief. All right, learn from my mistakes. Thank God I didn't get all the way through torquing that bitch down. kind of torqued me off pretty bad. Is that a thing that people say, being torqued off? It's not a thing I say, but unless I'm trying to be funny. All right, back in business. Looks like we got thin washers and thick washers. So putting the thin ones on top of the cone washers and the thick boys down on the bottom. Yeah, anyway, hoping that won't even have to pull it apart. Torque it down and it meets the specs. And we can just leave it be. That would be awesome. Now, one thing that's been kind of weird on these bearing races, the inner bearings seating onto these, what you call these, the trunnions, they're a tight damn fit, I'll tell you what. Reason number one why I hope that we don't have to pull it back apart. Get a little taparoo. All right, 71 foot-pounds. Inches, 71 foot-pounds. I don't know. Might be able to. All right. Check the spring tension. 6.6 to 13.2 pounds. So next up, we zero out this bad boy. All right. Set it right on there. Give her a little tuggy tug. Oh, there's 7, 8. Oh, there's 7. I think we might be golden without having to put different shims on. 6, 8. Okay, that's 7.5 actually is what it is. 8, almost 9. Yeah, 9, about 9. Pull it the opposite way. 8. Yeah, about 8, almost 9. That's a relief. There's nothing like having to hassle with pulling that damn thing all apart 6 different times to get it right. There we go. It's about 11. About 11 right there. Maybe 12. Good. Let's try the other way. I was reading the opposite side of the damn marker. There's 10. 8. 9. Dude, perfect. Freaking golden. So that really is the trickiest part of this whole job. Second to that will be setting the bearing preload for on the spindle, which is a little bit more of a process, but it's a hell of a lot easier to do. So anyways, what we're gonna need to do at this point, you can see daylight back behind the back there. So now we can proceed with mounting up all the gasket seals and whatnot back here. And then we proceed to start packing the shit out of this thing with grease. Slide the axle in, put the spindle on. We know that the grease that we install in here, the moly grease, is going to be all the way out to this seal. So you could coat this ball with moly grease if you want. I'm just gonna coat it with general purpose grease. I'm just gonna assist with a little bit of slip sliding along through there on the big felt gasket and the rubber. And then over time, the moly grease will kind of replace that. So we're gonna use some blue Loctite on the little retainer ring in the back, those 8 bolts, and we're gonna get this thing buttoned up. I put the split on that ring at the bottom and just gotta be careful that it actually gets closed all the way and it's not overlapping itself Here we are, fully lubed up with the Molly EP number 2, NGLI 2, and LGI number 2. Anyway, it's just high pressure grease. Extreme pressures, whatever. So we practically got the whole area lubed, cranked left and right, jammed in all of the spaces. Now we're just gonna shove a good bit down inside of there and then close it up. Now, on the short side, it's not that hard to get the splines to align into the differential. But on the far side, where it's so long, it can be a bit of a trick. So it's kind of a combination of teetering on that seal right there without wrecking the seal carefully, and getting the damn thing slid into position correctly and lining up the flat spots. Remember, the flat spots have to line up with the bottoms and the tops of the bearings there. So it's a bit of a dance through here. Let's see if we can make this work. I'm just gonna lube this whole thing up right here and then wipe it off. We just don't want, we don't want an excess amount of grease inside the differential, but we also don't want to fight with that seal. There we go, a bit of a greasy mess here. In she goes, gently sliding over the seal. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I got the seal surface cleaned up real nice with some emery cloth. Should give us a nice good seal. Now we start fishing around. Okay, it's part way in, not all the way in. It's gonna take a while to get. Ooh, damn. That one got luckier than hell, buddy. Oh yeah, wow, look at that. You know it's all the way in when you can turn it. Because when you can turn it, that means that the flat spots have cleared the bearing surface area here. This grease all over the bell of the berth. I bought 5 quarts of this shit. Probably a bit overkill, but I didn't want to run out. Last little bit here. Now, it doesn't call for any sort of fippage or sealant on this gasket surface, but I'm going to install it a little bit anyway. And I'm putting it on in a little bit of a different fashion than what I would normally do if it was without a gasket. Without a gasket, I would wrap each one of the bolt holes around and then lay a pretty small bead all the way around. But this one doesn't even call for that, so this is just a little bit to help, a little bit extra to help. And I spread on a little bit more fippage on this piece. Okay, so the bushing is cleaned off. And proper orientation with the drain to the bottom. It's pretty obvious which way it goes. And hopefully we don't get grease smeared out all over the place. Okay, get that little guy on there. Line it just a little bit better. There we go. Gotta turn it just a tiny bit. This gasket also with the drain at the bottom. That one's not sealing anything, obviously. And this is the trick where I'm surprised I didn't forget to put this thing on. Dust cover and then dust seal. Now, Cruiser Outfitters, I know, offers a backing plate eliminator kit, then that's what I did on my FJ40. But these ones are in pretty good shape, so we're gonna leave them on. Way you can put it on. Bolts are unevenly spaced. All those two. Probably not absolutely necessary, but just for peace of mind. It's time to put the bearings into the hub. Put just a little dab of oil in there. Usually use the old bearing races. And I could take it over to the press, but it's just about as easy to drive these things in by hand with the hammer, unless they start being real problematic. Problematic was what this one decided to do, so we ended up having to use the old race and the bearing itself and get a little bit creative to get that sucker driven all the way down in there. Obviously looking to make sure on the backside that she's fully seated. Very good. Basically look at where the removal marks are and see that it's fully seated on both sides. So good to go. Lastly, on the hub, put a little bit of oil around that, tap that seal in there. But not before you pack that bearing, grease up that bearing, then put the seal in. These are actually in really good shape, all these wheel studs, so got them cleaned up. We're gonna reuse them. Hopefully they find their same exact grooves that they came from. Well, there we have it. I gotta run, I gotta head to work, so could use the press again on those, press them down, but they are hammered in there. Made quite a bit of progress today. Hopefully get out here tomorrow or the next day, but over the next couple days, we're gonna wrap this thing up. All right, gang, here we are the next day. Got Taylor hard at work here on his own truck. Hard work cleanup duty, but we essentially set the preload of the bearings as per the instructions. It's pretty straightforward. All the steps are right here. Okay. They're pretty damn easy to follow. You essentially tighten up the first one. You get it all bearing lubed up, of course. You tighten up the first nut, then you put your lock washer on, then you put your last nut on and adjust the torques to specs until you get your tension set at 0.9 to 7.3 pounds on the preload. So anyway, we're trying to crack a lack here and get this thing reassembled so we can get this thing out of here in a timely fashion. So that's probably about the gist of these videos until this thing's all pretty much put back together. Everything else is pretty darn self-explanatory. Again, this is not a instructional how-to video, it's a demonstration and an overview. So if you have any more questions, leave them in the comments. Thanks. Stay tuned, we'll get this thing finished up. Okay, quick pause. The inner part of the locking hub is installed. 23 foot-pounds of torque with the cones and the washers. And we've chosen to put a little bit of sealant once again on both of the gasket there and out here. So the gasket is already installed. It's greased up, free of oil here. And we are going to slide it into position. Okay, let's see if this works right. It's in the free position. And out, or fully turned in. Okay. All right, we're just about wrapped up here. Got the outside done. New brake line, new brake pads, new brake rotor. New steel lines, new rubber lines.
Dude, did you wear pants that you don't want to get grease on?
I'm not really too worried about it.
So this is maybe just about the last kind of tricky part. It becomes pretty self-evident, but with all of those ridges, you've got to find the space that has an opening for that little tab right there in the center. And that opening is
that one right there where it's different and they're opposite each other. So it won't line up well unless you make sure that those, with that little tab right in there, line up with those. Okay, so grab this, Taylor. Okay, now, did you find the right one?
Thought I did. No.
Okay, where's the tabs at? Right one, there's this one. So turn this towards you and put this bolt hole on this one here. Now don't smear grease all over your freaking seal. Get it perfectly lined up.
Dude. You can do it. I can't see what I'm doing from my angle.
There you go. Now, again, that clip, that tab we were talking about, will buckle the gasket, so don't push it on. You've got to use the teeny little pick to make sure that the gasket doesn't get fouled up while you push it on.
Whew, we've just about made it. Thanks, friends, for stopping by, checking out the video. Appreciate you coming by, and if you would, take a look around the channel, see if there's anything else that interests you, and consider subscribing as we try to grow the channel here. So, we have wrapped up the project here. This is the final wrap-up video, and we're about to put the wheels back on and take it for a ride down the road and do a function check, make sure it's working properly. But just to do a quick overview of what all transpired or what all was replaced on this front end axle rebuild job here on the 62 series Land Cruiser.
So we've rebuilt the full insides of the hubs, new bearings throughout, new seals throughout, and new gaskets throughout as well. New rotors, new brake pads on the back here, all new steel lines, all new rubber lines, and that's on both sides, as well as new tie rod ends, and just cleaned up all the tie rod linkages there. So, it's been a long journey, good hell. It's taken quite a while now. Unfortunately, this one brake line is a little bit longer than I'd like, so what I may end up doing when I have time, this being my son's truck where I would have time in the future, is to shorten this and route that back behind here. The most important thing is making sure it's not going to interfere with this on full flexing, and it'll be just fine in that regard. But this was the brake line that I was able to obtain, and perhaps let's get that off of there real quick. Here we go. And perhaps down the road, what we could have done, or next time, is purchase these brake lines direct from Toyota. I'm not sure if they're available or how much they'd cost. So we went with the kind of bend it yourself, do it yourself from Napa, and it worked out. So now for the challenge of just getting the damn thing pushed out of the garage here. But anyways, that's for a wrap up for the series. Thanks for coming to the channel, and if you've been following along on this rebuild, I appreciate you. And this is the last project that's going to take place in this here garage space. I'll be in the process of kind of relocating, and to be honest, the garage is kind of going to be temporarily put on hold for a little bit while I pursue some other. Okay, got camera issues. Wheels back on it and send it down the road. So thanks for watching the videos. Stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you on the next one.